And we are live. So welcome everybody to Hack Shack Studios. I am RT Bear, 35-year comic book veteran, mainly Marvel, DC. But we broke away. We broke away and we started this little company called Image Comics in the day. And that was a lot of fun. Reminds me a lot where we're at right now. And where we're at right now is talking to the Vonster or Von Klaus. How are you, brother?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, no problem,
Appreciate
man.
it.
Yeah, so we were just talking that you're you like the musical Oklahoma.
I do. I still don't mind it. When I was a kid, I got way too into singing it at school, and yeah, I embarrassed myself pretty bad because I was still singing it when everyone else was. The rest of the kids finished. I was shouting out the OKLAHOMAO, and the whole school laughed.
Well, hey, there's
one of those.
There's nothing wrong with being proud of where you're from.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know of it is for where I'm from. This song got me, and it was just another one of those you fall down on your ass in front of everyone moments and laugh and go ahead and move on.
Yeah, public humiliation, you learn quickly. I've learned that on YouTube.
No doubt, man.
I fail every day live on YouTube.
Not today.
But
not today we are.
Today we will excel. Yeah, thank you so much, brother, for coming on. And we talked about this for a while about doing just talking about writing and trying not to get too technical, trying to keep it fun and light. But yeah, get into it because I don't know if you guys know, but a lot of times after we're done with the live streams, we talk, and sometimes we talk for hours. My God, as long as the show is, sometimes we'll talk even longer, when the show's over. And so we just got to talking about this stuff, and we're both pretty fascinated with writing. I think you're way more, experienced in that department, but I think it will be fun because it's one of the things that interests me the most. I would never say that I'm an expert at it, but I do understand quite a bit in my own layman's terms, and I do enjoy it. Storytelling is the thing I enjoy more than even drawing, if you can believe that.
Wow, that's great. I mean, that's going to make your drawing that much better, though, because you're always, every panel, everything you do, you're going to consider storytelling elements. And I think that can help differentiate, even if two artists are really good at their craft and the technicalities of it, in the end, is it not storytelling that takes it to a better level?
Yes. And if the initial story is crafted very well, the drawing of the story becomes that much easier. There was, I did some Titan spotlights in the day at DC Comics, and there was a writer named Dan Mishkin, and my gosh, it wasn't full script. It was like Marvel, where it's just plot or breakdown, but all the actions, this guy saw it in his head, right? So when I was doing the fight scenes and stuff, all the left, right, the punches, all the action or the cause and effect, all that stuff was in there. So when I was laying it out, it almost felt like it was already pre-drawn, it was already done. And that's when I realized, because I had worked with some other writers before that, and it was like pulling teeth. Like I didn't know what was going on. And then when I started drawing it, it became very confusing. So there was a lot of extra thought that went into it, and I don't think it was as successful.
Yeah, I mean, he is a script. You should look at it as a blueprint that you could hand to someone else, and then they can create something great with it. So your blueprint needs to have strong visual storytelling elements to it that are easy for an artist to, interpret and bring to the page. So, I mean, I think the more comic book scripts I write, the more I try to emphasize that so that it's easy for him to read, easy to understand, but he's also understanding the type of visuals and actions I'm going for. So, it really is important to not just, you have to direct your artist, but I don't like to over direct them. I want them to have their imagination and their contribution and feel in that comfort and ease when they're drawing it. You know what I mean? I don't want them worrying about every little detail either. So I try to find a balance, where I let them express themselves while telling the story that I have visualized,
Yeah, I think as you work with different artists, you'll find out their strengths too visually. Some artists don't like writers to choreograph fight scenes, because they're very good at it themselves. So once you get that kind of working relationship with a writer, you can just say, just give me the beginning, middle, and end, of this fight, and I'll choreograph, all the in-betweens. And so there's a lot of stuff like that happens in comic book writing, which is mainly, I believe you, but you've also done some screenplays and things as well, right?
Oh yeah. So I've been writing stories since forever, man. And I would get in trouble in class because I'm writing short stories about crazy lizard people built in labs and horrible things. And then I moved on to film school later. And that's where I decided like story is something I'm good at. It's what I do. Let's get way too good at it here in film school. I also found out that my film school had horrible storytelling. I think our whole culture is kind of going through a little crisis with that right now. And it's reflected in a lot of our movies, in our entertainment in general. So I made it my goal to be the storyteller. And yeah, by the time I left school, I had a bunch of screenplays under my belt and some short films. So I love it, man. It becomes, when you get good at it and you spend hours and hours writing it, you end up having these little breakthroughs that give you a rush that make you want to keep writing. So it's like a drug at that point.
Yeah, and I love it when like writing, they oversimplify, or it seems like is like writing is just rewriting. Writing is just rewriting. It's constantly going over what you've just written. Like write it, move on, come back, see what's connecting, what's not, and then doing it back and forth. And for me, I'm not that fast at it, so I have to really put it on the back burner for days and then come back to it, because then I can see where things aren't connecting properly and what I can do to kind of bridge some gaps. And even just dialogue ideas, can come in time. So I really like it. We have Death Metal Hero. Hail to Vaughn and Art. What's up, gents?
What's up, Death Metal?
Death Metal has the coolest hair in Comicsgate.
Definitely.
Yeah, hands down. So we have Central Scrutinizer. We have Edwin, the Ace Alcevedo. And so we're getting some people in the chat. Feel free to chime in, you guys. This is always best when it's interactive. And so we start talking about subversion, like subverting expectation. And this term, as soon as this whole Rian Johnson thing came up, I kind of thought I understood what it meant and how he was using it. And I started really looking into it. And I don't know why anybody would really want to subvert expectations as much as maybe divert expectations. But we're going to talk a little bit about that and see like maybe the do's and don'ts and maybe when it's a good time to use them and when is not a good time to use some of these elements. So from what I understand in a nutshell, like subverting expectations is more of a criticize or undermine kind of idea where you're like undermining something. And then diverting is like a direction, like a character can be on one path and then you're diverting the path into a different direction. And both of these, I'm trying not to be too judgmental with one over the other, but they're both good writing tools to have, because what they do is they bring in the unexpected. Right. So where you think something's going to go, it doesn't go. So they both kind of work the same, but I think one works in possibly a more negative way than the other.
Yeah.
What do you think, Vaughn?
I agree. So part of, as you know, any writer will tell you, what's going to keep people interested are those little turns, those twists and turns of giving people things. To me, it's about surprises, right? Little surprise here and then bigger surprises for the big major turns where an act ends or you get your middle or you get your big climactic ending. There's these big, awesome surprises along the way. But then there's these different tools like subverting expectations and diverting them that can be used. But yes, subverting expectations is something that I learned a lot about in film school. When I first started, I'm hanging out with all these other screenwriters, and they're all obsessed with like Fight Club, where, the guy you thought was his friend is really him, and he's crazy the whole time, all that stuff. Sorry, Fight Club spoilers, everybody. But it's very interesting, because what ended up happening was people started creating stories based on just subverting expectations, and the problem was they're making subverting expectations the thing they put the most value on in terms of their story, because they just want that shock value. They want to hit the audience hard. But what ends up happening too often when you do that, one of the problems I see is you end up having a character act very out of character. You end up having the plot do something that kind of undermines itself whenever you put that much emphasis on, well, did I subvert expectations? When really what you should be doing is, I guess, diverting them, or just creating cool twists and turns that are consistent within your story, its world, and its characters and their motivation.
Like a subversion is a complete derailment. I think is a complete unexpected. Like one of my favorites is in Pulp Fiction, when they have to get that guy. Remember, he's in the back seat, and then the one character's talking with the gun in the front, and then it just goes off and blows the guy away. That's the guy they were supposed to bring to the destination, right? So I thought that was great, because that was totally out of left field. But I think for me, subverting is all, and even diverting, but diverting is a little bit more, it's less of an abrupt move, but it's all about the payoff afterwards. So if you subvert the expectations, what do you then put in its place? And that's the thing. Like like with Rian Johnson, when Luke throws the lightsaber in the comical manner over his shoulder, well, you're subverting expectations, but you never rebuilt anything. You never brought it back to a better place. And you did it in such a comical manner. It really did work in a negative way. It didn't work in a positive. So
it hurt. Yeah, everyone felt like it wasn't Luke anymore in that movie.
Well, like you said, it was for the joke, and it was for the character. It was a character assassination. It did subvert. It did its job, right? You're like, what the F?
Yeah.
But in the long run, you're just kind of like stuck with this what the F feeling, but it didn't deliver anything. But like Pulp Fiction, like I said, when they blew that guy's head off, it became kind of funny. But it was kind of it was really twisted, where they had to clean the guy's car out, and they had to go to that cleaner. And they had those wacky T-shirts on and everything, because their clothes were covered with blood and stuff like that.
They had to send in the wolf. Yeah, it was awesome. That created a whole plot. Okay, Luke throwing the saber over the shoulder was just him just being a mopey character that we weren't used to seeing in Luke. That even Mark Hamill was saying, like, this is not the character that I was. So yeah, it's that had a payoff. If Luke had maybe risen his saber out of the ocean later in that story, we'd have a payoff that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, so it stood up, or he passed the saber to Rey, after she completed her training, or it had some significance. And instead of her going back for the lightsaber, it would have been better if he did after he figured it out, because then you do have the subversion, but then you have like this great grand payoff, which is why I didn't automatically sign off on it when I was watching the film, because I was thinking, okay, because I know a little bit about storytelling, I know this is going to be a subversion. But, I'm thinking, as probably every one of us did, he's going to step up and he's going to be the hero later, right? That's going to happen, right?
Of course. It's Luke, ultimate hero, that's what's the thing about subverting expectations is you should look at it like a tool, not a end all be all to making your story compelling.
That's what it is. It's more of like, it's a special effect, but if you use special effects all the time, they're not special anymore. Right. You can't make a whole movie out of subverting expectations, because also the subversion becomes the predictable. Then the pattern of the story becomes like you start anticipating the subversion. You know what I mean? Then the subversion doesn't even do its job anymore. So it's a matter of like when you're writing to have a lot of these tools, you know, a lot of these things at your disposal that you can use. So subversion every once in a while is not a bad thing, but it still depends on what you pay it off with later. Because you can take something away from a character, you can set it up that this great thing is going to happen with the character, right? But then you subvert the expectations, and then you give them something completely different. But to me, it has to be completely better. You know what I mean? It has to be better than what you've set up. It has to pay off in a bigger way than the way it was normally going to pay off. And I think that's fundamentally a lot of the problems here that I see, like you were saying, with more contemporary writing. The subversion is just it's just kind of a kid that's learned a new magic trick, right? Like, you know,
it's dynamite.
Yeah,
I think of it like dynamite. Like he just can't wait to blow everything up, the entire story, because it's powerful and it makes a big boom and it gets attention, but it can destroy your story. You got to be careful with it. Just use it to bust a hole through the wall and then make sure your hero makes it through and move on. Like it needs to be small doses, you know, or just be careful with it. It's gonna explode.
Like an M80 every once in a while, or a Roman candle.
I mean, but only if it works for the story is my rule. Like if it will not hurt the character and their motivations and stay true to the world you're creating, I'm all for it. Because you could do really cool things that show your character, because the point in the end is to give your character that arc. If you subvert expectations too much, that can really mess with that arc. You won't have them changing in ways they need to in the journey, and instead they're changing in these ways, or the story's changing in these ways that are just kind of like about surprising and shocking the audience, and then we lose track of the hero in the mix, I guess, and their journey, you know?
Right. And you want it to feel, even with the subversion or the diversion of the expectations, you still want it to feel organic. You still want it to feel like it's real. Like when they did, like in what was this, Sixth Sense? Like it didn't feel cheap. Like when they said, "Oh, he's dead all this time," but there were clues. There was things that were laid down. So when it was, the reveal was there, it was out of left field, but it felt right. It felt organic. It felt like it wasn't just a complete out of left field, you know, subversion. It was like, oh, okay, that's why he was distant in these situations. That's why he would never go into this room, or that doorknob he would never turn, or, you know, like the weird, awkward, what was it, dinner with his wife, you know, and all that.
Oh,
stuff. Yeah. And then you start,
it all fit. It fit, and it was a kind of a climax. It happened on the climactic turn of the movie, which worked too.
Yeah. It paid off right at the right moment. It felt organic. And that's where you can do it. You can do it very well. I like, I did look up diversion. So diverting expectations. And so I think this is probably more of a common way of storytelling, because like you said, like subversion is like a piece of dynamite being thrown, you know what I mean? Like this is some major stuff. And if you don't play your cards right and you don't really think this thing through, you can just blow up your entire movie like Ryan Johnson did, you know?
Yeah, and some, you know, some comic authors, like, they do that, and it's because they get like jokes and humor out of it. But when anything can happen at any time to subvert those expectations, and you don't know what's going to happen, it's wackadoo. Like that's when you can lose tension. It has the opposite effect of giving that pleasure of like, wow, I did not see that coming, man. And, you know, instead it's just like, yeah, I didn't see that coming, but like any second now, a guy's going to pull a chicken out of his butt too. It doesn't matter. So yeah, it's a tool in the box. You just don't want to overuse it. It's a big dynamite stick.
Yeah. And I think you have to, if you're going to use the subversion, you have to be very careful, and you have to go, well, if this is why I'm going to do it and it pays off, then that's fine. If it's just for a comedic effect, like throwing the lightsaber over your shoulder, then don't do it. Especially like you said earlier on, I thought it was a really good observation. If it's just for shits and giggles, if it's just to get a quick rise, like, oh, that's funny, then don't do it, because you're compromising your character.
Right.
And you should never do that. You should never play a joke above the character. And I've been seeing that a lot lately with film. The Marvel movies are they are so close to just crossing over that line with those jokes, to the point where they're compromising character. And that's really, really bad. But as far as diverting expectations, I like, because it's like you have a character and you set them up in such a specific way. He's an underachiever, is a bad egg, whatever. Their destiny is going to be, they're going to be horrible, horrible people. And then, as you divert the expectations, you see during the journey of the story that this course of events happen, and then they rise above it. So they're diverting the expectations, but in a more organic story beat. And I think that works better. I think they call it like just a story arc sometimes, but I did look up diverting expectations, and that's a form of it as well, is when the character just starts off one way and then ends, in a completely different place.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to, like, to me, it's always about staying true to these characters. I feel like they kind of tell me what to write sometimes when I get into them. I'm always asking what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and I think about what's gonna be like make things harder on them. And so when I divert expectations, I feel like I try to do it in a way that helps the character grow. That's why subverting is dangerous again, because a lot of times it doesn't make the character grow. It just it can change who they are in a way that's very unappealing. So yeah, when you're diverting though, it's like a natural path that still has surprises on it to keep the reader interested. And that's what it's really about, man. I've taken a lot from manga in my work, because I think manga does a good job of packaging these smaller, but yet interesting enough twists and turns for characters and what happens at a story, to where like I put them in my stories, and I'm just looking at page after page of all these cool little little miniature turns and twists that happen, that put our character in different predicaments. And I really do think that's how you keep interest, how you hold it, you sustain it,
Well, let me ask you a question. I just thought of this as you were talking. Do you think subversion should only take place in form of plot misdirection or redirection versus character redirection? Because I think most of the examples that we were coming up with were more like it derailed the plot or redirected the plot versus the character themselves.
Yeah, that's a good one, because I see it as very potentially making your character's growth arc unnatural and kind of messing with that. I see it as, but except we have movies like Fight Club where, boom, he was Tyler Durden the whole time, or Sixth Sense, he was dead the whole time. And that worked for their character arcs really well. They did it right. They did it on a big turn. Which would either be like the middle of the movie or towards the end, and they made that the climax, if you will, or one of the bigger twists. So yeah, I don't want to say it always kills character, and always, it just, you have to make sure it fits within your character's arc, so that it's impactful but doesn't break the character, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think it's easier though? I guess what I keep coming back to, is it easier probably to do bad with the subversion? To do good?
Yeah, because in film school, every guy I worked with was like, Fight Club is my favorite movie, and I'm going to subvert every expectation with my movie. And so their movies were these, just about surprising you, but there was no organicness to it. It becomes a cartoon in a way, instead of something grounded in reality you could get into. So I was just like, okay, you guys are worried about, because you get too worried about, am I surprising everyone and shocking them enough? And you lose track of the story and characters.
Yeah.
So that was, I think it's very attractive when you're a young new writer to be like, ooh, I'm gonna show people something they've never seen. I get that. But then you realize that it's not as powerful as taking them on a journey where the character changes more organically, and there can still be twists and turns, but you don't have to tear the bottom out of whatever genre you're working in to do it. Unless it works. That's just always my policy in the end, is like, if it works, use it. If it doesn't, don't. And that's why subverting expectations, like I said, is dynamite. It's a lot of times you can blow yourself up with it. So
yeah, that's why I think that the best thing is when you're creating is to leave all those cards on the table. You know what I mean? Have all those tools available to you, those ideas, and then whichever one works the best for the situation, that's when you use it, because not any of those is necessarily bad. It just depends on how you bring the ingredients together in the form of your story, how you mix it up. But I definitely think, like Rian Johnson, there are several subversions in that movie, and they were all basically subversions in the most undermine, because those are the definitions: undermine and critical or cynical ways of doing it. So he congratulations, he managed to pull off his subversions, right? But at the cost of I think somebody wrote in to respect the lore, like in lieu of everything else that the story was to service. And that is why he failed.
Yeah, well, I was amazed when he was hired, because I look at him as kind of an artsy film school director guy, and he brought that with his script, where he was like, everything needed to be subverted to be entertaining in his opinion, and there was this attitude towards this movie that seemed really hostile towards the old ones, that I think really didn't sit well with people, and those subversive ideas. He ended up questioning and attacking the old ones in a lot of lame ways. I mean, the Jedi Knights used to be this, I don't know, you looked up to them, I guess. Maybe the prequels made them a little more, controversial or what have you. But I always looked up to them as this mysterious group that was awesome and just well-trained and did the good guy things. And that was enough for me as a viewer. I thought it was awesome that Luke went on his journey to become one. And that made them special.
Yeah, Star Wars Star Wars, the art of Star Wars really is, it's very, very simplistic G versus E kind of storylines. There's very little gray in that world, and when they do bring a gray area character in, like in the original trilogy, it was Han Solo. And so Han Solo, at the end of the first story arc, he did become a hero. Like, he's the one, like, it was the two-pronged battle. Like, he's the one that knocked Vader's TIE fighter out of the trench, so Luke could make the shot. And holy shit, that was a great idea. But it was a really straightforward story. And then Rian Johnson just brings in all these gray area things and these subversions and things that just really aren't Star Wars. And I think if you're going to write a franchise, you also have to understand what makes the tone work. My God, that movie could not have been further from a Star Wars tone. I mean, we can bag all we want. Was it Force Awakens or the first one? But at least the tone, it felt like a Star Wars movie. You know what I mean? It wasn't great. It wasn't imaginative. It didn't go outside the box. But the tone was there. And go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just it's interesting because you're seeing a reflection of our culture. Like when the original came out, Luke had to, what did he do? He puts away his targeting system for the big climax and he believes in something greater than himself and he takes the shot and he makes it. And Rian Johnson was, you know, like all of that spirituality, all of that belief in something greater than you is kind of crap. And it's just a reflection of like where we're at culturally. And also what happens when you hire what I see is like a perpetual film student to do your movie. Like they think subverting expectations is all it's about when it comes to entertaining people or standing out as creators. And really, yeah. And in the end, he did not mind stomping on the lore, stomping on beloved characters to do that. So it's a really good example of subversion having a cost, you know?
Yeah, because he also did it several times throughout the movie. So it wasn't just one subversion. You know what I mean? It seemed like thematically it was like a domino effect throughout the entire 2 hours. You know, it just kept up, and you're like, okay, when are we going to move the plot forward? We're getting all these subversions, you know, but when is the plot going to actually move forward? When are we going to get some character development? When are we going to get some plot? We got nothing. So
it's bizarre. It's really weird. And those movies are written by committees too now. And he had a story team of, you know, Kathleen Kennedy approved acolytes to make sure he stayed in line. You know, he had to run everything by them as he wrote the script. It's really weird.
Yeah, I noticed that DC Comics is doing that a lot more lately. But you were talking about these aren't your words, but where you get writers and people that really shouldn't have these jobs. And I used to refer to it as like, I've seen it a lot in my 35 years, Vaughn, where some of these writers and artists as well are getting these jobs that actually have contempt for the IP. They actually have contempt for what they're doing. And it's been years, so I can actually name names. My old roommate was John Moore, and his writing partner is Howard Chaykin. And so they both worked on that Flash TV series. And I remember, you know, your friend, we lived close to the studios. I used to go in all the time, and John and I would talk. And I would say, why don't you do more Flash gags? Why aren't there more Flash gags? The pilot has a ton of Flash fun little gags that are in there. And the two that wrote the pilot of this is Danny and Paul. I don't remember their last names, but they wrote the Rocketeer screenplay. So they wrote the pilot to the Flash TV show, and then they, not the new one, but the original one. And so it was a lot of fun. There's a lot of speed gags and things. The Flash is kind of a comedic character. He runs fast, but there's all kinds of mishaps and fun things that can happen. Like one, he has girlfriend coming over, and this was in the pilot, and Danny and Paul wrote this. He's trying to clean up the apartment real fast before his girlfriend comes over. It's a mess, right? And as cleaning it up, he's creating a tornado. You know what I mean? So he's making more mess than he's actually creating. So then when he opens the door, the place is an absolute mess, like worse than it started at. And so, you know, I'm talking to John about these things. And so then finally he's honest with it. He said, well, we're writing it more as a procedural cop drama. And I said, why would you do that with the Flash? It's called the Flash. Right. And so he's like, well, that's what Howard wants to do. And so then I started thinking, like, you know, the more you talk to Howard, Howard doesn't really like superhero comics. He doesn't really like those. He doesn't really write them. He doesn't do those type of comics. So he was fundamentally trying to reshape something because, this is my terms, contempt for the IP or the source material. And you see that a lot. Like I think Rian Johnson, I think he had contempt for the source material. I don't think he had love for it. I don't think he had care for it. I think he really enjoyed shitting all over it. He took such great glee. Remember that, like, reconstruction and all this stuff? I mean, he took such great pride in just basically creating a clusterfuck And I think he knew exactly what he was doing, and I think that he wanted to do it. He was like a kid, that wanted to push the buttons and get some reaction. The problem is, I think the reaction became way bigger than Disney really wanted it to be. So I've seen that a lot. I also have a friend, he does special effects, and he was an old roommate as well. And so we were talking about the Batman cowl, the first Michael Keaton Batman cowl, and how the eyes, you can see the eyes and all that other stuff. And we were talking, and I was just being a novice, and I say, well, why can't they just block out the eyes? Because the eyes, if you can see them, you can easily tell who that person is. I mean, the bottom of the mouth is partial, but if you see the eyes. And so he said, they just didn't really know how to do it. And then he said, my friend's the one that did the sculpts and came up with the visuals, and he doesn't even really care for Batman. He put this thing together. I thought it was okay, but he showed me some of his friends just in their garages, working, their special effects artists, right? Concocting all these different Batman cowls and stuff on their own. And so you realize, like, some of these guys that are getting these jobs it's just another job to them. You know what I mean? It's just a paycheck, and they don't really care. And some of them will even go a step further and have actual contempt for, the projects or the IPs. And I think right now, since there is so much of this kind of, more comic book material being made into film, and a lot more of this like sci-fi and like fantasy stuff being created, there's a lot of fans that really understand the core material. They love those IPs and those stories. And so, Hollywood's kind of doing the normal Hollywood thing, of just pretty much rebranding and pooping all over stuff. But the fans are like, no, this isn't it. This isn't, because before, when you get like maybe one or two movies like this a year, if you were lucky in the day, now you probably get 10 to 20 to 30 films, that are like this. So, the fan base used to just go, well, we're lucky if we get one of these movies, so they don't poo-poo it or criticize it as harshly as they do now. But now with all of this stuff coming out, I think you see more of this. And I think it becomes more apparent where a lot of these people that are getting these jobs don't really care for the source material.
Or they want to they have their own agenda for it, has been happening a lot, like the politics and stuff. And it's really sad, because Star Wars is one of the first things you learn about in film school as the quintessential hero's journey. And it seems like they avoided doing that in every way they could, when all they had to do was almost paint by number a plot for the new Star Wars and for the trilogy, and they would have had a really even more fun, successful trilogy if they had just gone back to basics and stuck with what made Star Wars so resonating with all of us from the beginning. Instead, it was, we'll try this, we'll try making Force Awakens, it'll be like A New Hope, but just wearing the skin of it. And really, it's just about how girls can do it too, all right? And then we're gonna do Last Jedi, where it's about like everything you know about Star Wars or loved about it is stupid, and here's why, and it's just and all they had to do was, ABC, as far as I'm concerned, a classic hero's journey. And Hollywood should know that better than anyone, because they're in the business of storytelling and making people want to get to those theaters. They should know what works, but it's like they've forgotten, because they've all become so political, so arrogant. I think that's where Rian Johnson gets off, is there's a lot of arrogance to how he approached this as being his Star Wars, rather than our Star Wars for the audience, for the fans who are very passionate about it. It's crazy that, to me, that's something so simple that obviously is why, like, when you talk about Star Wars in film school, that's all you talk about is that hero's journey. And they were like, we'll do better than that. And they proved that really you can't, or at least in the context of Star Wars, you're gonna mess it up if you go against the classic hero rising, up and becoming something greater. So
I totally agree. Do you think that there's contempt, there's agenda you brought up, but do you think that in a contemporary sense that some of these things have become, not that I think they're cliche or corny, but do you think that people coming up now are thinking they're smarter than, generations before? Do you think they feel a good G versus E plot is just too simple and too corny? So they have to bring in cynicism, or they have to bring in more of like a cynical point of view to something. And especially it becomes very noticeable when you do that with something like Star Wars, where it just didn't really have those elements. You know what I mean? In a contemporary way.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, or a question to ask, because like when you learn story, you learn that the hero's journey there's a reason it resonates with us and has for thousands of years as human beings. And to me, that's like, people ask me what my secret to writing is, and I'm just like, I just understand that you need to go back to basics and stop trying to reinvent the wheel. So, and Rian Johnson, he's such an art student. Like I said, he's like a perpetual film student. That isn't good enough for him. They always think they're deeper, and they've got these deeper things to explore, and then they just end up making a mess of things too often. So it's not like you can't do a cool, deep, kind of out there sci-fi movie and question a lot of things. But like, did that work in Star Wars? A lot of people would say no.
Well, Star Wars, I just don't think lends itself to those questions. It really is a pretty straightforward G versus E template. The good guys wear white and the bad guys wear black. It's like an old Western, and then, Han had grays and browns. You know what I mean? Like, he was the gray area character, ends up becoming inspired to become the good guy. So it's not like he stayed a gray area character. And also his cynicism and his sarcasm was all within the tone of the story. You know what I mean? It didn't go so deep as to say like what Rian Johnson did in the one scene where there's the guy that's the mumbler, and he's the renegade, and he says, there's that revelation where, oh, well, these guys are not only selling weapons to the good guys, but they're selling weapons to the bad guy, or the bad guys, but they're also selling weapons to the good guys. And all of a sudden you're like, what? The rebels are buying, like their weapons and stuff like that from criminals or gray area characters. They're enabling these awful people to do this. I always thought the reason that the rebels had they had beat up ships and stuff is they were hand-me-downs. You know what I mean? They weren't state of the art. They were buying these things secondhand. These were junkered, kind of machinery and things like that. So I never got the feeling like that there was some guy, some agency or whatever that was a weapons, merchant, like both sides. Like, what the hell? This isn't Star Wars. What the hell?
Yeah, that was political commentary on arms dealers, and you're just kind of going, ugh. Yeah. Like, can we get back to the fun adventure movie, please? Like, this is stupid. Yeah,
like you
totally,
said,
man.
If this is the point of the story, if this is the story you're telling, then that's fine. But it just doesn't belong in that IP. It doesn't belong in the Star Wars universe. I think when they did, what was the Star Wars? It was the prequel that Disney did. Oh my gosh, where they have to get the information for the Death Star.
Rogue One.
Rogue One. Thank you. I think that's probably as dark or as heavy drama as you should get with the Star Wars. You know what I mean? And that worked because it was a prequel and it wasn't trying to pretend to be part of, one of these trilogies. And so,
a Dirty Dozen war movie,
right,
is really how that came
everybody
off.
dies at the end, So it's weird that movie is kind of standing out as the better of the Star Wars movies. But I think that it felt deliberate. It felt like that was the movie they wanted to make, and they delivered as far as the tone and everything else. And these were characters that lived more in the gray world. You know what I mean? These weren't your Luke Skywalkers or the Skywalker lived This wasn't the the Palpatines. It wasn't
Right.
it wasn't that
A ragtag, a bunch of, it was the underground. It was the gritty war story,
right. And these characters
fun.
were the ends justify the means. That's what these characters were. So I thought the world that they set up for that 2-hour adventure worked. Would I say that it felt like a George Lucas Star Wars film? At places it did, but mostly no. It felt like they were really trying to make a good war movie, like you said, Dirty Dozen kind of film, and they achieved that. And I can respect that, because I think that it did deviate, but it didn't deviate too far from that stuff. And there's ways of doing it, and there's ways to do it horribly.
Oh yeah.
Hey, did you see that? What was the Rian Johnson time travel movie with Bruce Willis?
Looper.
What'd you think of that movie?
I didn't. I was really excited for it because back then I was an artsy film student nerd when it came out, and I had seen. I believe Rian Johnson did Brick. Did you ever see Brick?
I haven't seen that. No.
And that was a very film student-y movie, and all my film student friends loved it because everyone talked in a very bizarre yet interesting way. And it was like a crime noir thriller, but it was with high school kids. So it was kind of interesting. And so Looper, I was like, oh, he's doing sci-fi and action. Oh, this might be cool. And so I wanted to see it, but I never got to see it. I started hearing a lot of weird things, like bad things about it. So I backed off.
Well, after all the talk about, Rian Johnson now, there's no way I'm not gonna, just like Zack Snyder, I'm never going to support that buffoon. You talk about somebody that doesn't understand the hero's journey, but I thought Looper was really a weird movie. I found the more compelling story was the woman, the mom, and the kid. I thought that part of the story was way more interesting than the Bruce Willis part of the story. And I was like, I want to see their story. I don't want to, I don't want to see these guys, So I thought the movie was okay, but just okay. When I heard he was the same guy that they were bringing into the Star Wars films, I was like, oh no.
Yeah, I was a little tense too. I was like, oh, he's very film student-y, And then you hope that he still loves Star Wars and understands it, right? Like, I remember thinking, like, well, he's probably the right age. He probably grew up with Star Wars. He probably understands it, loves it. And so you hope. And then he kind of came in and was like, yeah, screw you guys. Ghost lightning from Yoda. Yoda has ghost lightning, and we're burning all the texts. Let's burn some books. It was so weird.
I heard a theory about that. The reason that Yoda didn't look like a ghost like in the other movies is because like in China, because of the spirituality or whatever, they were saying that it was a harder sell, with these like true Force ghosts. And the thing is, they're Star Wars is epically failing in China anyway. So why try to placate them at the cost of your core audience,
It's so weird too, because when you saw Force Ghosts in the original trilogy, it was more beautiful and mysterious. And then finally, I believe in Jedi, Ben talks more and sits down and talks to Luke. And that was cool. I remember that being very special, but now it just seems like everybody's a freaking Force ghost walking around like and shooting lightning, and like it's not as special or mysterious or interesting anymore. Well, I hate that they did that.
Why don't we see Obi-Wan? Oh, that's right, the actor's dead.
Oh yeah.
Unless they do the young Obi-Wan. Yeah. Definitely. Well, you know what? I had a ton of fun, Vaughn.
Yeah.
This was a blast, man. We talked about for a little bit of time, and we were both a little nervous that we could, if we could make this entertaining or not. So let us know with thumbs up, and if you guys could tweet this out, let us know if you like this kind of content, because you're very easy to talk to, Vaughn, about this stuff, and I have a ball talking about this. Yeah.
Me too, man. It's blast. And I love your insights, into things. It helps me better understand story, and that's something that I love to do. I want to be a master of my craft. So I look for good insights and experiences where I can get them, and I always love hearing yours, man. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, well, thank you so much. Like I said, you guys, please give a thumbs up, a sub if you haven't, and double check to make sure you are subbed, because we are being purged, Vaughn.
Yes, the purge has begun.
Yeah, especially the stuff if you talk about Star Wars. So keep Star Wars out of your title of your videos, guys, because you're going to get purged big time. So yeah, please sub. If you know people that like this kind of content, please do so. And I believe Vaughn and I are probably going to talk for an hour after this show and figure out what to do next. So thank you guys so much for showing up. Thanks for hanging with us, and we hope to do this again for you. So
see you guys.
Take care, guys.